Welcome, everyone. Today, we've got a truly eye-opening explainer lined up for you, and we're focusing on something incredibly powerful: authentic spiritual healing. Specifically, we're diving deep into the practice of Ruqyah, relying entirely on source text and scholarly teachings to really grasp how it destroys every evil eye and combats spiritual afflictions. If you've ever felt like there's just this unseen weight dragging you or your family down, you are absolutely going to want to stick around for what we've uncovered today. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed some totally unexplainable physical, mental, or emotional distress in your loved ones? Out of nowhere, people might experience sudden illnesses, intense roadblocks in their lives, or even drastic personality changes that modern medicine just kind of shrugs at. Well, according to our sources, these can actually be the very real, unseen effects of spiritual ailments, things like the evil eye, magic, or jinn affliction.
Okay, let's dive into this roadmap so we know exactly where we're headed. First, we'll cover the reality of the evil eye. Second, we're looking at Ruqyah versus forbidden magic. Third, what is Ruqyah Sharia? Fourth, the powerful verses of healing. Fifth, steps for self-Ruqyah. And finally, patience and true healing.
Section 1. The reality of evil eye. Let's get right into these unseen afflictions.
So these unseen afflictions, they are a very real and honestly sometimes frightening problem. Our sources highlight that they actually manifest in tangible physical ways, especially in the most vulnerable among us, like children. For instance, the scholars outline some very specific, alarming symptoms to watch out for. A child might start crying intensely the exact moment they hear the azan, or during moments of fear, their pupils might become abnormally large. You might even catch them repeatedly doing forbidden things, almost as if an invisible force is pushing them. The sources give this wild example of a child being repeatedly told not to spill a glass of water, but they just keep doing it under some strange compulsion. In extreme cases, they might even point at totally empty corners of a room in sheer terror.
Section 2. Ruqyah versus forbidden magic. And this brilliantly illustrates the crossroads people face. Look, desperation often drives suffering families to seek help literally anywhere they can, right? And that brings us to a massive divide in our source material. On one hand, you have pure Ruqyah. This is based entirely on the Quran and Sunnah, representing a pure, unadulterated reliance on a law. But on the other hand, you have forbidden practices, things like traditional kavaraji, fortune-telling, and astrology. The sources are incredibly strict about categorizing these as shirk and kufr, meaning associating partners with God. These forbidden routes often mix Quranic verses with dark magic, amulets, or even demand downright sinful acts, and that is absolutely 100% forbidden in Islam. Now, you might be wondering, how in the world do these fortune tellers actually seem to know things about you? Well, the source material provides this fascinating, almost mind-blowing cosmological explanation. Get this. Jinn actually stack themselves on top of one another, reaching all the way up to the heavens just to eavesdrop on the angels discussing decrees. When a jinn manages to catch a single word of truth, it passes it down the chain, all the way to the sorcerer or soothsayer here on Earth. But, and here's the catch, before that tiny truth is spoken to the client, the jinn mix it with 100 lies. That's exactly why a fortune teller might get one tiny detail right, tragically hooking people into believing the 100 falsehoods surrounding it. The theological stakes here are massive, guys. The sources explicitly state that simply going to a fortune teller or reading a horoscope, even if you're just doing it for laughs or pure curiosity, results in your prayers not being accepted for 40 days. Just think about that, 40 days. You are still required to pray, sure, but the spiritual reward completely blocked. And if you actually believe what the fortune teller tells you, the texts say you have disbelieved in the revelation entirely. It's a huge deal. All right, section 3. What is Ruqyah Sharia? So, to avoid those incredibly dangerous traps, what exactly is the correct path? Well, the definition provided by the sources is crystal clear. Ruqyah Sharia is an Islamic spiritual healing method, period. It strictly utilizes verses from the Holy Quran, authentic supplications or du'as taught by the Prophet, and the physical act of blowing your breath onto the afflicted person or into water. That is the whole shebang. No strange rituals, no sacrificing animals for spirits, and absolutely no reliance on anyone other than the Creator. Now, what's really interesting here is the concept of tawakkul. This is the absolute core condition required for Ruqyah to actually work. It means absolute, unshakable trust that Allah is the sole healer. The verses themselves, the water, the person reciting, none of these things possess their own independent healing power. They are merely the sunnah medium. Your heart has to be firmly 100% attached to the belief that the cure ultimately comes from above. Moving on to Section 4. Powerful verses of healing. Knowing the conditions, what exactly are we supposed to recite? The scholars emphasize a core set of spiritual tools that are highly potent for this. First up is Surah Fatiha, the opening of the Quran. Then Ayatul Kursi, the verse of the throne. Right after that, the three kuls, that's Surah Ikhlas, Surah Falaq, and Surah Nas, which are absolutely crucial for providing ultimate protection. And finally, Ayatul Shifa, or the specific verses of healing scattered throughout the Quran, which are heavily utilized to literally draw out sickness. But why these specific verses? Well, the source text actually quotes Surah Al-Isra, verse 82, which provides a literal divine guarantee. We send down the Quran as a healing and mercy for the believers. You see, it's not just a book of laws or historical stories. Its very recitation acts as a direct, tangible medicine for both physical and spiritual ailments, as long as the reader approaches it with pure faith. Section 5. Steps for Self-Ruqyah. So the crucial point is, how do we actually apply this medicine? This is where we get actionable. And honestly, the best part is how incredibly simple it is. Step 1. You just sit down, focus, and recite those specific surahs we just mentioned, like Fatiha and the three kuls. Step 2. You blow your breath directly into a container of pure water. Step 3. You drink some of that water, and then take whatever is left, mix it right into your bathwater, and wash your entire body with it. The sources note that people often feel an immediate physical shift, like a heavy, suffocating weight has just been lifted right off their chest. And I really want to emphasize this incredible, truly empowering point from the sources. You do not need a professional. Let me say that again. You don't need one. In fact, self-ruqyah is considered the absolute best ruqyah. You don't need to hunt down some specialized scholar or empty your wallet paying someone to do this for you. Anyone can and, frankly, should perform this pure act of worship for themselves and their family. A desperate, sincere prayer for yourself is often way more powerful than someone else's prayer for you. Section 6. Patience and true healing. Now, we have to talk about the hard part. What happens when the healing isn't instant? Because surviving long-term spiritual struggles requires a very specific, resilient mindset. The sources strictly warn us to beware of Satan's tricks during this process. When you start performing ruqyah, Shaitan is going to try everything to trick you into giving up. People might suddenly feel like their face looks darker, or they might even see fake physical marks appear on their neck or hands. No joke. They might experience overwhelming whispers telling them to just quit, making them feel like the Quran is somehow making things worse. But the scholars are adamant. These are purely illusions. They're just desperate, last-ditch attempts by the unseen affliction to stop you from applying the cure. Let's move to see how this builds, because fighting off those illusions requires massive effort. The sources note that if someone is heavily afflicted by long-term magic, they might actually need to recite Surah Falaq and Surah Nas anywhere between 100 to 300 times a day. If that's just too much, then at least 70 times. The main takeaway here, you must exert continuous, relentless effort. If you don't push back against the darkness consistently, you simply won't break the spell. Do not despair, and whatever you do, don't give up. Which leaves us with a final thought to consider. With all this knowledge laid out, the choice becomes incredibly clear, doesn't it? Will you allow desperation to push you toward forbidden superstitions that literally only serve to block your prayers? Or will you take control, place your trust entirely in Allah, and empower yourself with the pure, completely accessible healing of the Quran today? The cure is literally right there in your hands. Thank you so much for joining us on this explainer, and we'll see you next time.